Okay, I guess you could say this video was a long time coming, since I've really kept it no secret that I believe this movie to be one of Disney's weakest efforts in some time. Now, as always, you don't have to agree with me on that and love the movie if you so choose, but I will always insist that that 94% it had on Rotten Tomatoes was nothing short of critics kissing Disney's butt. I mean, I'm not saying it deserved a zero or anything like that, but that score is just way too high for such a flawed movie. And with that being said, today I'd like to try and explore where exactly this movie screwed up. And I guess now is the time to warn you that there will be spoilers for this movie ahead, so if you haven't seen it yet, you should probably wait until you have to continue. You have been warned. Alright, there's a lot I want to cover here. So to start off simple, I believe that this movie suffers from two major problems and a couple of other minor ones as well. And surprisingly enough, no, one of these is not Sisu. Because no, she isn't the funniest character in Disney history, but I also don't see anything wrong with her. Besides, I don't care what anybody says. Her imagination sequence of giving Narami a gift and they walk off into the sunset is easily the funniest scene in the entire movie. I mean, I actually think it was a pretty interesting idea that instead of having the last dragon and hope for humanity be some wise old sage with all the answers like in most of these classic tales, she's in way over her head and barely knows what to do herself, learning as she goes along, just like the other characters. And then there's her trust thing, but I'm going to get back to that a little later. Now, one of the minor problems I want to address first is something I covered in my video on The Princess and the Pauper, which you can find a link in the description to, which is that it's trying way too hard to modernize its story. I mean, it's supposed to take place in a fictional version of ancient China, so why doesn't it feel like that's where it's taking place? Because I don't know about you, but I don't see anything wrong with movies that embrace other cultures or the place that they're from. I mean, look at Mulan. By properly mixing accurate Chinese culture and dashing in just a little typical Hollywood stuff, Disney created a classic for the ages. And not once did they need to bring up bad parent jokes. Seriously, Disney, is this an animated Chinese epic or a movie adapted sitcom? And honestly, I think Turning Red suffered from this same problem. Because other than it being the origin of the red panda, her Chinese background isn't really explored at all. And honestly, I believe the origin of said panda might have made for a better story than the one in the film. But the other problem is May's design. Honestly, does she even look Asian to you? Would you really remember she was if it wasn't repeatedly mentioned? Okay, I'm talking about the wrong movie here. Let me get back on track. The point is, the movie is trying to be an ancient Chinese movie and throws in a ton of modern humor. And I will never understand who thought that was a good idea. I mean, a con baby? Seriously? Now, to be fair, I don't hate that joke. It actually is pretty funny, but I think they way overdid it. It's as if they thought that was the funniest joke in the world and decided to milk it for all it's worth. And personally, I just think that whole idea is a little too ridiculous to be played up so heavily like it was. One or two scenes would have been okay, but they way overdid it. Because again, is that something that would really fit in with ancient Chinese culture, or something you'd be more likely to find in a 2000s comedy skit? I mean, I'm not saying the movie shouldn't have funny moments, the furthest thing from it actually, but that they went about it in completely the wrong way. But to get into the two major problems I'd say this movie has, the biggest of them just has to go to the movie's villain, Narami. And again, please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, especially because the other big issue ties directly into her. Now, if you've seen a lot of my other videos, you will know that she was originally supposed to be a much straighter Disney villain that was actually controlling the Drun, and it was only once she was defeated that everybody could prosper. But then they decided they wanted a more complex villain. And it's like, Disney, no! Because not only is a classic Disney villain something they desperately need these days, I think that would have made for a story that tied in much better to the culture and time period this movie's set in. In other words, I think among other things that it would have helped the immersion factor along much better. But instead, we're left with somebody that the narrative is constantly telling us is a good person that's just misunderstood, but none of her actions back this up. Because the thing is, she may be sorry for her actions, but every time she's given a chance to redeem herself, she doesn't take it. And in the end, only saves everybody basically because she has no other choice. Now, don't get me wrong. Theoretically, a character like her could have worked, but they completely botched it. Because, as many have pointed out, Sisu's death is her fault. And then she won't even own up to the fact that she just doomed everyone again and has to push the blame onto Raya, who ends up believing her. I'm telling you, you don't know how confused I was watching that infamous scene where she makes that claim to Raya. And as I said in a previous video, I have seen grown men literally throw fits over it. To put it another way, I can see why people absolutely despise her when the narrative wants you to feel sorry for her, because she never does anything but betray that alleged sympathy at every turn. Now, to be completely fair, I did like the dynamic between her and Raya. They gave that real old friends turned enemies vibe, even if that's not entirely accurate to their history together. But again, I think that chemistry would have almost worked better had she just been a straight evil villain, because it might have helped put a very unique spin on the hero and villain dynamic found in most Disney movies, where the two pretty much just hate each other from the start. And I'm not saying that formula doesn't work, just that sometimes something different is also okay. But with all of that being said, the other major problem with this movie is the moral. I mean, I can't remember the last time I saw a movie that was so determined to shove its message down your throat at every opportunity it gets like this one does. But to point out the good stuff first, I do believe that saying we have to trust each other more, and that if we just sometimes give somebody a chance, things will turn better out for all of us. That in and of itself is not the problem, just the way they go about saying it. And also, I know some have taken issue with Raya developing deep-seated trust issues after trusting a girl for only one day and being betrayed, but personally, I could believe that would happen. I mean, look at what trusting somebody cost her, and she was already shown to be rather mistrusting before that, with it actually having to be her father who convinces her to give them a chance. So it's not hard to assume that Narami's betrayal only solidifies her beliefs. And the same goes for Sisu's continued insistence on trust after being betrayed to the Drun. I could easily see something like that only making somebody be determined to reinforce their beliefs, especially if they're particularly stubborn. So my point is, I could actually see both of those things happening in real life. But that being said, if there was ever a movie out there that demonstrated how not to get your moral across, this would be it. Because it becomes so overbearing so quickly that the adults and even kids will lose interest in it because, as I've said before, if there's one thing people hate, it's being preached to, and all this movie needs is the choir to go with it. I mean, it can't go 5 minutes without either telling us that Raya has trust issues or that it's not good to mistrust other people. I mean, I'm not even the biggest fan of this expression myself, but Disney, have you ever heard of show, don't tell? And because of this, as well as they're wanting to make Narami a sympathetic character, she becomes the main subject of that. And boy, did they screw it up. Because I said it before, and I'll say it again. Sisu's death is her fault. Raya decides to trust her, and she comes armed and is about to kill her when Raya intervenes, which unfortunately isn't enough to save her. I mean, if she didn't interfere, that scene would have turned out exactly the same, only she wouldn't have had anybody to pass the buck to. What would her excuse have been then? And the worst part is, they're trying to say that it was Raya's fault for not trusting her, but then accidentally frame it as Narami's fault. So not only do they spend the entire movie shoving this moral down your throat so far it comes out the other end, but they end up subverting the whole thing in the process. And Sisu also becomes a victim of this as well, because we're supposed to see her insistence on trusting people as being in the right. But almost every time she does trust someone, she ends up betrayed in one form or another, making her accidentally look like an idiot. Seriously, if it weren't for the part where she dead seriously blames Raya for Sisu's death, I'd almost have to wonder if they did all of this so backwards on purpose. And to quickly address one minor problem, what also doesn't help is how big they were trying to make the movie. Now please tell me, when has Disney ever tried to be big or epic? I'd say the closest they ever got to that was The Lion King, and even then they knew how to streamline the narrative to make the story work. Here they're trying to do way too much at once, and combining that with the fact that they don't even explore its homeland's culture leads to quite a few of the issues I've just mentioned. But once again, to be totally fair, I do think there is one thing this movie gets absolutely 100% right: the ending. Now, one of the producers said that she wanted the movie to have a real old-fashioned Disney happy ending, and I'd say she most definitely nailed it. Setting aside the fact that Narami arguably doesn't deserve redemption, it's all there. The characters coming back to life, the celebration, the unambiguously happy atmosphere. This is really a Disney ending ripped straight out of the classical era. Now, I know some have complained that the dead shouldn't have been brought back to life and that all of the members of Raya's boat should have become the family they had lost. But the thing is, people do understand that Disney is supposed to be escapist entertainment for kids and adults alike, right? I mean, it arguably isn't anymore, but the way some people talk, you'd think that they were watching the most serious drama ever. And as I've said many times before, the children must be considered, and probably more so than they already are these days. So to put it simply, for a movie that screwed up so much, the one thing they did absolutely nail was the ending. Okay, there's a lot more I could discuss here, but I think I'm going to pretty much leave it at that. So basically, I believe that it was a combination of many different factors that caused Raya and the Last Dragon to fall off the rail, if you get the expression. With the two most important failures being how they decided to get their message across to the audience and how Narami tied into that message. But even with all of that, at least with movies like Encanto, Disney has shown that they still have the ability to tell good stories, and that maybe they'll learn from their mistakes and missteps they had with this movie. I mean, I doubt it, but there's always hope. And keeping that in mind, the mistakes they made here should not be overlooked, as most of them are actually pretty basic ones that even amateur writers should know how to avoid. So either this movie had a much more troubled production than is known about, or the writers of this movie could have used a few more lessons in how to write a script. But either way, one can only hope that Disney will learn from their mistakes, and that soon this will only be considered a tiny misfire in a sea of future masterpieces that have yet to be released. Again, it isn't likely, but there is always a chance. Alright, I think that's where I'm gonna end it. So now I want to hear your thoughts. What do you believe was the biggest mistake made with Raya and the Last Dragon? Or do you believe it was great and that I was being way too hard on it? Please feel free to leave a comment below telling me. And sorry if I came across as a little more mean-spirited or crass than usual, but this movie just highly irritates me, as should be obvious at this point, and sometimes I let my frustration boil over into my commentaries. But remember, you don't have to agree with it. You are entitled to have any opinion you want on this subject, or any other we discuss here. And lastly, thank you all for watching. It is very greatly appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.